Hey, welcome everybody to Comprehend This podcast. How's everybody doing this morning? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, let's be honest. In the battle for student attention, reading is usually up against TikTok dances, spicy ramen challenges, and whatever weird thing they found on YouTube at 2 in the morning. But today, we're proving that reading is actually the secret weapon for language teachers. And we've brought in two classroom superheroes to help us out. We've got AC Quintero, teacher, author, and the reason your FBR shelf suddenly has a waiting list, and Pat Rolfes, teacher and master of turning even the I Hate Books crowd into page turners. Buckle up. By the end of this episode, you might just be tempted to trade your lesson plan for a stack of novels. And honestly, your students might thank you for it. We'll be back just after this short video. Ever feel like you're clinging to the edge of your teacher planner, just hoping today's lesson magically appears? Enter the CI Survival Kit, a monthly membership made for teachers who love comprehensible input, but also love not reinventing the wheel every Sunday night. Each month, you get fresh, ready to use lessons, time saving tools, and just enough structure to keep your teaching life together. No stress, no guilt, just monthly help from someone who gets it. Sign up at mm.us/survival and let the survival kit do the heavy lifting for once.
Welcome to Comprehend This, real talk for real language teachers. No drills, no dry theory, just honest stories, practical ideas, and a reminder you're not alone in the CI trenches. Let's dive in.
And welcome. How are we doing this morning?
Thank you for having us. I'm doing great.
You are
Yes,
so welcome.
it's good to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so glad you guys are here. And today we're talking about reading and everything that entails. So let's go ahead and get started. What was the first time you thought, wait, this reading thing is actually powerful in your CI classroom? Anybody want to start? Go right ahead.
Let's all raise our hand at once. I'll go.
Okay.
It was when, after a classroom story that we created through whatever it was we were doing, that we had to write and discuss, and then that night I quickly typed it out. And the next morning, when class started again, I said, "Okay, we're going to do some reading." And they're like, "We've been in class for like a week. How are we supposed to read anything?" "Oh, trust me, you can read something." And, I added a little bit of this and that to it. It wasn't just straight from the board. And they were just absolutely gobsmacked that they were able to read it. And they're like, "This seems familiar." I'm like, "Well, it should. We went through it in class yesterday." So then they got kind of excited. They were able to say, "Hey, I've been in class a week and I could read." So, and it might have been a little less than a week. I'm just guesstimating.
Awesome. How about you?
I love that story, first of all, because I think just the power of language and cognizance, and I think just from what Pat said, the concept of building that capacity and building confidence, like from the very first day, I think that is a very powerful tool to hook students. My story, or my way, the way I found the reading stage or how it works for my students, is a bit unconventional. So I was teaching, this was years ago, I was teaching upper level class, and we were trying to learn a subjunctive because that was like part of the curriculum. And I was kind of like a new student, and I'm a new teacher. And so the kids, they just didn't get it. And I just kept thinking, like, if I can contextualize this, I think that they would have a little bit more success. So what I did was I wrote a story, and later this story will become Las Apariencias Engañan. But when I wrote the first installment, it was called El Psicólogo, which is the psychologist in Spanish. And I told my students, I said, "Hey, I have a friend who really loves to write, and she gave me a few chapters of her new book, and I wanted to try them out in class. I think this could help us understand the subjunctive better." So as the students, and I wasn't intending on writing a whole book, honestly. I was just like, let me just try with this first chapter. So one of the boys in class, I'll never forget, this was my 8th period Spanish 4 class. His name was Adam. He's reading the story and he yells out, "This kid is beast. Oh my gosh, Senora Quintero, does your friend have more of this story? This is so good. Oh my gosh." And they just kept talking about it. And I was like, okay, I wasn't intended on writing more, but I said, I can talk to my friend and see if she can give me another installment for next week. Well, here's where that was the first part where I knew, like, okay, this, like, reading works and it really hooks kids. But there was a student who was ditching class who actually came back to class because she heard through the grapevine that we were reading a juicy story. So she came back to class and I just thought, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, like, we're not having a fiesta in class. We're not watching a movie. We're actually like reading a book, and this kid is like changing her like extracurriculars to come back to class to read the story. And then later, I heard from there was the student who fed me this information. She was an advisor of mine, and she was in Latin class, and she was like, "Yeah, Miss Quintero, so and so is coming back to class." And then she told me one day that kids that were taking French, they were upset that they didn't have an engaging story in class. And I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, we really got something here.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, I don't know about you guys. I started with CI with TPRS way back. 2001 is when I started. And novels, the only ones we had were from Blaine Ray. That's all that we had. And we didn't do too much of reading our stories. But Blaine Ray suggested at the time to start a novel after like the first or second week and read a chapter every Friday.
Hmm.
So we did that, and the novel that we read was Pobriana. I can't read it anymore. I read it for like 7, 8 years, and I've got it memorized, and I just can't do it anymore. It's just there's so many better things out there. I'm not to put down Blaine Ray's book, but it was really good for the beginning students. But
Oh,
it was so basic that I mean, after reading it so many times as a teacher, I just got tired of it and needed to move on. But what I liked about it and what got my kids hooked, they're like, we can't read a novel because their novel is like thinking an English novel. It's high school. They're thinking, the English novels they have to read
right.
after a week of Spanish. And I'm like, oh, yes, you can. You can do it. And we're going to start. And so we did the Pobriana. And it was really funny, the experiment, because I was always a bad, bad reading teacher. I was
Mm.
horrible. I made a couple mistakes because I don't read. I'm not a literature. I like to read, but I
Mhm.
don't think that when authors write their books that they're intended to be analyzed and dissected the way that we do in school because
Mm.
they're there for entertainment. And so I
Mm.
like to read for entertainment, and I don't think we should analyze them to death because then it takes the fun out of
Mm.
the reading for me. So we started reading this book, and I read it the first time I'm reading it live with my first period. I did not read it beforehand. I have no idea what's going to happen. It is just that what happens in class. So I'm reading this book, and I'm like, God, this is really repetitive because it's like there is a girl. There is a girl. Her name is Anna. Anna is a normal girl. There is a girl whose name is Anna who is a normal girl. Anna lives in Torrance, California. Anna is a normal girl who lives in. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is repetitive. So I asked my kids, and it was really funny that some of the kids said, oh yeah, very repetitive. And those are my top kids. But the low kids were like, no, it's not repetitive at all. But he did that to design to make it more comprehensible. And you think of stories for kids, Little Red Hen and the Three Little Pigs. They're very repetitive along the way, so they can learn how the language works. So they were really surprised, and he used a lot of cognates, a lot of beginning vocabulary that you would normally learn. And so my kids were actually reading and they were enjoying the reading, even though the plot wasn't there was nothing in the plot at all. Nothing happens in the book, but they were actually surprised that they could read and go back home. And I'll tell you the little story about that being a bad teacher. I was reading The Trip of Your Life, and I was reading it in class, and we were doing a dramatic reading where I'm reading it and kids are acting it out. I did not read the chapter. And again, this is a Blaine Ray book, so he doesn't always understand the nuances of the teenage life and the teenage slang and the teenage stuff, because he wrote a story over and over again in his book about blue balls. And he kept saying, how many blue balls are there? I'm like, you can't do that in high school. He had no clue. No clue. Great man, but very innocent. So, I mean, you cannot write. He changed it later to red balls, but he had blue balls for the longest time in that book. And you're asking 30 questions about blue balls, and the kids are just cracking up. So here I am. I'm reading this book. And if you don't know this book, they're on a cruise, and then there is a necklace that gets stolen. And so it's the scene where the necklace gets stolen. And I like reading. They're sitting at the table. It's dark. She reaches under the table. She grabs something. It's hard. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm already got 2 feet right in. And I'm like, I can't get myself out of this. And the kids are all cracking up. And I'm like trying to keep a straight face. And I'm like, and then the next thing it goes, it's shiny because it's a diamond. And the kids go, what? That doesn't go with it. So don't do what I did. Please pre-read your chapters so that you don't do those kind of mistakes. I would not have picked that chapter as a dramatic reading if I had read the chapter in advance. But those kinds of things get the
Wow.
kids hooked in that. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know what, Scott, I will say as a side note, also like as an author, when that's something that I do take into consideration. Like I have to read stuff because there have been, I remember with this one book, it's an upper level book, El Escape. So I ended up changing the chapter order because it was, at the end of the book, the kid goes into his mother's room and sees his mother, and the chapter stops where it's like it seems like his mother is in the bed with somebody, but it's a pillow. And I remember, and it's a real, it's like, the book is a thriller, and it's like this whole thing with like this police officer pursuing the kid is actually like the criminal and then falls in love with the mother. It's like really crazy. But I remember reading that to my student, and I had this, like in the book forever. And my kids were like, oh my gosh. And they were like asking questions. And I was like, no, 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 no. Well, we gotta wait till we get to the next chapter. And I was like, you know what? Let me change that right now, because if my kids are asking me these types of questions, then so you do have to be mindful of the perception and the teenage mind,
Yeah.
because like we're writing and we're like, oh, this is a really good thrilling piece, and the kids are like, oh, what's going to happen in the next chapter? That was my mindset, but the kids were like, oh my gosh, this book is, oh, what's going on, Miss Quintero? So I was like, okay, let me rewrite, let me change things around. So and it really, you also, it's a good idea. And again, I know this is not what this conversation is about, but for those teachers that are out there and they're writing stories and they're writing, it's a really good idea to have like a beta reader. So I always have somebody like read, not just I have a proofer, have an editor, but I have somebody like read the story, and I give them questions. And depending on how they answer those questions, I know that I've done a good job. If the answers to those questions are a little off, then I know I need to go back and I need to rework some stuff. So.
That's a great point. That is a great point. Because there's lots of things. There's also a faux pas. Was it in? Oh, it was in Brandon Wants a Dog. There's a
Mm.
picture that's drawn, and he's got his knee up in
Oh
bed. He's
God.
got a blanket over, but it doesn't look like the knee. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
and who else was it? Oh, now I just forgot her name. In one of the books, what book was it? I can't remember, but she named the after a movie. She named names after a movie, and one of them was Bend Over. And I'm like, you can't. She goes, but it comes from a movie. I go, you cannot put that in a book with the teenagers.
Oh no,
I
no.
can't remember.
Yeah.
Christy Placido was in her book, and she goes, "But that's a
Oh,
famous
okay.
character." I'm like, "You can't put that in a book because you and I may know who that is, but the kids necessarily don't, and that's not what they're going to firstly think."
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you have to do that, and you have to be cognizant of situations that may encourage bullying as well. So I know,
Oh yeah,
like, I'm very careful with different things because I'm like, well, what if there's a kid in class that's similar to the character in the book, and then so there's so many. It's like a little matrix. You really have to work around that stuff.
it makes it so hard. It makes it so hard. We had, and I'm just going to talk briefly about this because we had a teacher who didn't want to read a couple of books that we had. And instead of saying, let's just change our books to read, went to the superintendent and said these books should not be read in class at all.
Oh
And so we
wow.
got these books, they were banned. And I couldn't believe
Mm.
it. And one of them was Patricia Ba California. Patricia Goes to California, because one sentence in the book, which was not a false statement, said that Guatemalans were poor.
Mm.
And she says that is pigeonholing all Guatemalans, and that's a negative connotation, and we shouldn't talk about this book. And I'm like, no, that's a point for discussion. When that line comes up, then I'll discuss it with the kids and put it into context. But you can't ban one whole negative sentence about a
Yeah,
people does not
yeah.
cause. And the other one she got banned was the one written by a classroom. The what was it called? I'm horrible with names. I got to look at it. I can see the picture. It's the one where they go to Peru. I can't think of what that one.
Hmm.
It was written by students. They all put it together, and it puts Americans in a bad light. Not unrealistic. It's the typical tourist and Americans who take advantage of the culture, make fun of the words, those kinds of things, and says, well, it puts Americans in a bad light. We shouldn't have that book either.
Oh
Oh,
wow.
Los Bakers Banaparu. That's what it is. Los Baker
Oh,
Banaparu is the one.
okay.
And so we shouldn't have it. So she got that book banned too. And I'm like, we talk about this and say, we don't want to be like this. They were written like Simpson characters. Deliberately, they were written that way. So that we
Yeah,
can have
yeah,
that discussion about, let's not be the person who wants to order chicken in another country and then make the chicken motion instead of actually trying to say the language or something like that.
mm,
And so that brings up discussion points. And if you have nothing controversial in a book, there's nothing to discuss.
yeah,
And I can't bring out the cultural points like, this is not how we want to be. We want to be more educated when we go to a culture and learn about that culture and try to integrate within that culture so that we can, not stand out like Americans, because that's the opinion a lot of people have about Americans, because we're monolingual. We don't care
yeah,
about the culture. We only speak English, and we expect everybody else to speak English. We want to turn that around, and that's a discussion point. So
right.
I
Mm,
think you need those controversies. That's one of the things that in a lot of Blaine Ray books, there weren't those controversies. So there wasn't lots to talk about and have discussions about. And so I like a lot of our newer books that we have where we have those discussions and can have those discussions in there.
yeah,
So
I will say, oh, go ahead. I
I
don't
was
want
going
to
to
hold
say,
us up 'cause I know we got
no,
a
no,
lot to
no, no,
go.
no,
This
go ahead. No,
this
you're
is
fine.
really interesting. Well, I was going to say that I think I understand why some people find those books problematic. I definitely understand. And like the one liner, that could be interpreted as like a generalization, and so but I also think so if you're not comfortable, like if you don't want to use those books, I feel like you shouldn't use them.
Yeah.
There are tons of other books out there. But I also recognize, I was talking to a teacher about this a couple of years ago, and she was saying that their district had bought like a lot of the books that you mentioned, the titles. And then there were a lot of teachers saying like, yeah, like, we're not using these, and kind of, and again, like they had some valid reasons. I don't want to
Yeah.
minimize that. But something that I never thought about was this teacher was like, well, that's all the money we had. And we cannot like disavow these books. We can't throw them away. And they're like already part of the curriculum. And I remember when I first taught Pobre Ana, and I actually did feel that the book was kind of like this overgeneralization of Mexico. Like I had studied in Mexico and it was like very different from what was described in the book. Now, do places like that exist? Yeah, but guess what? They also exist here in the United States. Go to the
Mm-hmm.
South, New Orleans, go to different parts of, any, urban city, you're gonna and so I think that sometimes those books lack the balance, and it's like, oh, this is poor, we're rich, and we're coming here. But anyway, when I taught the book for the first time and I didn't know a lot, we did have a really good discussion in class, and I remember my students, they didn't appreciate some of the perspectives in the book. So one of the assignments was we wrote a letter to the company in Spanish, and we kind of listed out like, like what we didn't appreciate. And then we talked about like this beautiful, vibrant Mexican culture. And I remember I was telling the kids about my experience. And I told them, I said, this, because I do think that is the prevailing stereotype of a lot of places. Because when I
Mm-hmm.
went to study in Mexico, I'll never forget my roommates were like, you're gonna have to go wash your clothes in the river. I mean, and they weren't joking. They kind of, this is what they thought. Kind of like the way that we think about Africa, right? We always just kind of have this
Mm-hmm.
destitute perspective. And so when I got to Mexico, I remember emailing, going to an internet cafe, emailing my roommates, and they were asking me, and I said, "Oh, I have a maid, I have a chef, I live in this like mansion," and I did. I lived in a really nice neighborhood. It was walking distance from school, and it just shattered their perspective. And so, and ironically enough, my roommate was actually from Africa. And it was like, so I kind of was like, well, what if people are saying this? So it's kind of, um, I think if you have to do it, and you have materials that you feel can be controversial, I like your approach of being like, okay, well, let's unpack this, and then let's identify and kind of go from that route if you absolutely have to use, the materials in class.
Yeah, I agree. I think using that as a contrast that we can say, because it says this is what the book says, but let's look at all the different things and let's compare it with America. America, we've got rich places, we've got poor places, we got places in
Mhm.
between. We've
Right.
got violence, we've got nonviolence, we've got all these places in between. You can't just use one sentence or one chapter of a book to describe a whole people and a whole culture. But I think that's the teacher's job to instruct that. Because it was also ironic, the same teacher who didn't like those books, loved the pirate books. And we're like, the pirate books are like some of the most offensive ones when it comes to stereotypes in there. And a lot of people all over the internet have complained about that particular book. And I like that book, but again, when those stereotypes come up, I use it as a discussion point and say, these are things we don't talk about. They're the things that are changed, and are these really true statements to go on? Instead of banning a book, I think it's much more useful, and to teach kids how to be better human beings overall, to look at it from a different perspective, and unpack it like you said, and compare it with what we have in the real life, so they can actually make their own educated choices and not just
Right.
say, sorry, bad book. Because I don't think there are any bad books. I think we just a different perspective, and if we look at those, we can find things. Because for me, books are great worlds, in great viewpoints into different worlds that I'm not necessarily a part of. And so that's why I love, especially with the new trend, is the written by us for us books, where
Mhm.
people from the actual culture are writing about their own culture instead of the whitewashed version written by white authors. um
Mhm.
you could, like, when you have, like, if you're a white author, like Gab, I can't think of her first name again. All of a sudden, I'm really bad with names. People don't know,
Carol,
but
Carol
Carol,
Gap.
thank you. I am really bad with names. I like when she wrote the books in Spanish, but about American culture, like when they were buying the car and stuff like that,
Yeah.
because that's what she knows and that's the
Right.
truth.
Right.
But I
Right.
love books that are written by Hispanics or by French people or whoever, whatever language, about their own culture, because it
Mhm.
brings a richness in. One of my favorite books is the one the kid gets lost in Medellin.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. I just came back from Medellin.
yeah, so it is a beautiful book, and it teaches through a white lens. The kid, he's white from Canada, learning about the Hispanic, the Colombian culture, and it
Mm.
does it in such a way that I don't know, I just like that book. It is really a good book, and it shows how you can
It's a good
meld the white,
balance. It's a
yeah, the
good
white
balance.
perspective with the Hispanic perspective,
Yeah.
and the white kid is coming in with curiosity, not judgment.
Mm.
And
Right.
so I love that book, and I think it's one of the really excellent ones about culture and bringing that in. So I love that trend where we're starting to get a lot of books written by Hispanic and French and German and Asian people about their own culture, and that brings a richness that we weren't able to see before.
Yeah. That's true.
And Pat, do you have anything that you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I agree with everything you guys have been saying. It's, you know, it's up to the teacher to guide the class. If there's
Mm.
something in the book that you want to make sure that you clear up and say, okay, this is a generality. How can we fix this, or how would you rephrase this? You know, so that it was more inclusive. And it's, you know, the teachers have to be in control of their classroom, not the administration, in my point of view. And unfortunately, you get overruled
Yeah.
sometimes. You know, to have the one line in a book to get banned just because of the one sentence, in my point of view, that's just absolutely ridiculous. Because, like you guys said, that's a talking point. That's
Yeah.
something that you can go into depth with. That's something that you may have students in your classroom that can refute, you know, on personal experience and say, oh, no, that's not how it is. Yes, there are areas that are that way, but same with the U.S.
And I really liked the Portrait about California. I use that one a lot because I talk about the racism that is ingrained in that book, because the white cheerleader, and I'm using white as a loose term. I don't have another way to explain the our culture, um that she thinks that just because they speak Spanish that they're Mexican. She calls everybody Mexican. And she goes, I'm not Mexican, I'm from Guatemala. And that's one of the great things that the rich culture of the Hispanic people is. They are one united Hispanic people, but they're also very specific in the country that they're from. They're proud of their heritage and the countries they come from, and I think that's important. So it was a great discussion that we had about assuming just because they speak Spanish in America that they're Mexican, because they might not be. They could be Guatemalan or Puerto Rican, or they could be Nicaraguan or Colombian or Peruvian or whatever country. Just because they speak Spanish does not mean. It's like if I go to Europe, everybody thinks we're American, but we could be Australian, we could be British, we could be New Zealand, we could
Well,
be,
right, from different places in America, because
yeah,
I feel like when I go places, people always think I'm from Texas, and I'm like I'm from Chicago. So just like in the U.S., we have all of these different states and cultures. You know, like we are not a monolith either. You know what I'm saying? Like we band under being American, you know, but like I am very proud to be from the Midwest
yeah,
and very proud to be from Chicago, you know. So and I find it interesting the same way. Like when I go abroad, people are just they give me this generic and I always make a point to say I'm from Chicago, you
yeah,
know. Like yeah.
I taught for 23 years in Worthington, Minnesota, which is a melting pot of a wide variety of ethnicities. It's, you know, the jobs were brought there, or families were brought there because of the jobs at the packing houses and stuff. And the students range from here to there and then some. all through Central America, including Panama. We had students from a couple of countries in South America. We had an Argentine student, which, how they managed to come to little tiny Worthington was amazing to me, because we never had an Argentine student before. And we also, for other ethnicities, we had people from like 8 or 10 different countries in Africa. We had 4 or 5 different Asian countries represented in our school. There were at one time 28 spoken languages in our school, not including the indigenous languages. So we had one translator and interpreter, and he only did Spanish. So they hired out a lot of their work so that things could get into the correct language for the students, like the handbook and all that kind of stuff. And my students on day one usually would come in and they're like, well, we're going to learn to speak Mexican. It's like, no, sorry, you're not. You're going to learn to speak Spanish. I said, for one, I personally never had a professor from Mexico. And so, my professors came from Chile, Argentina. One was from Puerto Rico. 3 were from Spain. I said, I'm a hodgepodge of different languages, and little bits and pieces came in from everywhere. Yes, I did spend some time in Mexico, and so there was some Mexican influence in my Spanish, but it wasn't because I had a professor or a teacher from that country. It was what I picked up from being there. And so it's like, no, you're going to learn to speak Spanish, and some of the Spanish is going to be different than what you would hear if you went to Mexico, just because of how I was influenced in learning the language myself. And it would agitate me a little bit when they would say, I'm here to speak Mexican. It's like, no, sorry, you're not. You're here to speak Spanish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's move on to something a little bit less in-depth or deep, I guess I say. And let's talk about, what reading approach do you love the most? Is it silent reading, class novels, embedded readings, reading class stories? Where do you fall in that? And why do you think it works for you and your students?
Well, my kids, we always did the class stories. We didn't have special days for it or anything like that. We always did a class story, because that way the slower learner felt accomplishment in being able to read something. And I could turn a class story that was, maybe 2 paragraphs long on the write and discuss portion of it. I could turn it into a 1.5 pages typed, just by adding a few extra details here or there, and zhuzhing it up a little bit, and I'd throw in a student here or there, and just to make things interesting. But FVR, I'll be honest, I had a pretty gosh darn good FVR library, and I spent 20 years creating it. And so I had books from Scholastic, I had books from all of the CI authors out there, I had AC's books in there, and they were a favorite amongst students. I had a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I also taught a class of Hispanohablantes, Spanish speakers. And so I had the upper level books like Harry Potter in Spanish, so they could read at their level of wanting to read and not be stuck with just the, 3 bears in Spanish or something like that. So FVR to me, really cemented the reading into the students, because we'd start with 5 minutes, and then we'd eke up to 6 and 7 and 8, and finally we'd end at 10, because I just couldn't afford to give them any more time. And I would get the, Profe, I want to read more. Well, come back tomorrow. Or, I've got lunch free. You can come in and read then if you'd like. Or after school is open, my door is open, come on in. And I occasionally had a kid that would take me up on it, because they were at a point where they really wanted to see what happened next. but, giving them self-choosing. And I told them, if, it's like a library. If you don't like the book after the first 2 pages, go get a different book. Don't sit there and pound your head against the book. I mean, there are plenty of books out there. And they would go and change books. And I said, once you get to the chapter books, though, I want you to stick with it for a minimum of a chapter before you decide you don't like it. Because things might change. And you might go, that's one of the better books I've read. And so I used a conglomeration of different activities, but FDR to me was the best. And yes, by the way, when they read, I read.
Yeah.
And my reading, a lot of times I did on my iPad because I had it saved in Kindle, and I was reading murder mysteries from Spain by an incredible author that I follow, Pablo Poveda, not to just throw a name out there, but I love murder mysteries, and he does an awesome job of it. But on the first day that I would read, I would have a student come up, and I said, so you guys read books. I'm going to be reading off my iPad, but I want to prove to you that I'm reading. So come on up, and I need a volunteer to take a look at what I'm reading. And they would, and they're like, how do you understand that? And I said, I've been doing this a while. And they're like, she really is reading something in Spanish. She's not playing a game. She's not playing a game. She's not doing attendance. She's not, filling out tardy slips or whatever. She really is actually reading. I said, yes, I really actually am reading. And then when you guys are finishing up, I'm still reading. And I had at times kids get all their books put back and go, Profe, are we going to do something? Because you're still reading. I'm like, yeah, I'm at a good spot. Okay, fine. And I would have to close, mine, but it showed them that you can get to a good spot and want to keep going. And I think they appreciated that. And by the time it was all done, I did have kids literally asking me, can we read longer? Can we read, if you finish your homework, if you finish your, and my homework was real simple stuff. It wasn't complicated homework. It wasn't grammar worksheets or anything like that. It was draw the story we did or something like that. If you finish it, then go get your book and read. And they would. So that's kind of how I, scheduled my classroom. We always started with it. That way they could calm down, usually from lunch or whatever class they came from, and just get into the groove.
Absolutely. And I agree. Putting it first is a really important thing because then it shows it's a priority. And a lot of teachers go, I never find time because I run out of time at the end of class. I go, don't put it at the end of class. Don't put it in the middle of the class. Make it a priority. Make it the first thing you do. And it's a great calming activity, especially if they come back from lunch or PE or some kind of high energy class. It lets everybody calm down and everybody starts in a calm spot after the reading. So if you make it a priority, it becomes a priority. And just like you, I'm reading as well. I'm walking around because I'm also doing discipline because a lot of kids will hide an English book behind the Spanish book. Or they're like, I'm really liking this book. I'm like, really? You must be talented. The book's upside down. They don't even know that the book is upside down. So I'm walking around reading too, and I'm reading off my Kindle, but I'm reading French books because I'm, practicing re-engaging with my French. So I've got all the French novels, I have the FBR novels in French. So I'm reading those. They're like, what are you reading? I show them, it's in French. It's not in Spanish, but it's in French. I go, I know my Spanish. And I've read most of these books. So I want to do something different. I'm reading the French, but I'm reading in a foreign language, just like you're reading in a foreign language. And, I'm doing the reading just like you. I think it's really important. I think it was Bryce Hedstrom who really puts it forth that if you want your kids to read and you want your kids to enjoy reading, you have to set the example. You've got to read and you've got to enjoy reading. And I remember one of my schools had nothing to do with language, but we had a silent reading period school-wide. So we stopped for 10 minutes on this. It was like 2 or 3 times a week. They would make the announcement, silent reading time on the bell. If anybody came into the school, a delivery person, a parent, anybody came in, They said the secretaries had a little sign that says, "We're in silent reading. Here's a basket of books or magazines. Please pick one up, sit down, and we'll be with you in 10 minutes." And so everybody from the custodians to the secretaries to the principal, everybody was reading that. So that's my rule too. If someone comes in my classroom, we're reading, you don't interrupt us. Please grab a book and sit down, and we'll be with you when we're finished. So that was always a really key thing. And my kids know it's a rule. There's no bathroom breaks, there's no questions, there's nothing. It is silent reading time. And you can have your question, but I'll answer it afterwards because I'm enjoying my reading time too. And I think it's a very important point, Pat. So thank you for sharing that with us.
The only time I allowed them to ask me a question during the reading time was if it was a word that appeared like a dozen times on a page that they were reading and they just couldn't figure it out and they were desperate to get through that page. Then I would break the rule and in my room and say, okay, you can ask me your one question. And they would ask me about the one particular word. Oh, that makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
Is what I'd usually get. I said, okay, now get back to reading. I said, I'm at a good spot too, so get back to reading.
Get back to reading, exactly. We've got a question here from Vicky Schrader. How early in their learning process do you start FVR? Do you think there is a too early? Anybody want to tackle that?
I went full-fledged FVR. My twos very definitely from day one, but my Spanish ones, it kind of depended on the group. Some classes we would start maybe a month in. I was on semesters and 4-period days, so block scheduling, so 90-minute classes. And so it depended on how the class was going. If the class was on top of things and really moving along, well, then we'd start about a month in. If they were struggling a bit, you know, I might eke it out to 6 weeks or something like that. We didn't necessarily all start at the same time. It was depended on how I felt the class was going. If they were ready for self-selection and so on.
AC, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, so I'll give my opinion and I'll share real quick my preference as well. I do normally I start with books second semester and then I just do a lot of short stories up until that point. Just because a lot of my kids who come in, they don't know any Spanish, and then we have to work through a lot of the confidence stuff and identifying cognates. And at my school, we're really big on equipping them with like reading comprehension skills, just all across the board. Doesn't matter, the subject area. And so I like to sort of embed those so that once they start reading, they kind of come with the toolkit. And they know what to do. They know how to handle a context if they don't understand a word. We talk about, and even just when I do reading assessments with them in the prep, because normally I give them like authentic, and this is like upper level. If they have an authentic text, we talk about, do you really need to know what this word means? Like, can you figure it out? And then if not, can you just move on? Because a lot of kids now, I feel like, just with the anxiety, they really perseverate on, they want to get it correct and they want to be perfect. And so I know we struggle at our school with that being like our student profile. Like they really will just be stuck on something and they won't move on. So we're like trying to show them like, hey, do you really need this? And with the comprehension skills. In terms of your first question about FVR or classroom novels, so I kind of do both. I like starting off with a classroom novel. I do mostly classroom novels in my level one. And then maybe towards the end of the semester, like the end of the year, they do some FVR. And one of the reasons I do that is because a lot of the novels are connected to like the units and themes. So if we talk about education, I'm doing La Clase de Confesiones. When we're talking about personality, I like to do this book, Filomena está aburrida. And then when we do adventure, I like John Seiferd's book, La Isla Más Peligrosa. So it's like I like to sort of, I guess, train them through doing the classroom novel first. And as we do those novels, it's not just reading. Like it's, we're discussing the novel. They have, by the end of like the second novel that we do, they're facilitating their own like book talk. So I'm teaching them um, through classroom instruction how to come up with their own questions, so like in the beginning it's me coming up with the questions, right? Because we're doing like maybe picture talk. There is, or picture talk like questions, I should say, where, or circular, where you're taking the cognates, and you're leveraging what they know. But then it comes to a point where I'm like, okay, I want to put you in the driver's seat. I want you to actually grab this book, and I want you to talk about the cover and why you chose the book, and they can say, oh, me gusta el color, me gusta, hay dos personas, and it's kind of real fun and real goofy. But so yeah, I do like, that's my purpose for using like whole class novels. Now, free voluntary reading, I agree with Pat 100%. One of the things I do that a lot more in my upper level classes, because these kids, they get so excited to choose their own novel. But prior to doing that, I do have a system. We do a whole little mini unit on reading. Okay. So I like everything I do, I always have like a little system. We do like a little mini system on reading. We talk about, and we do this in Spanish, we talk about our interests, we talk about genres. And through this, I'm kind of helping them figure out, like, number one, we're talking about reading, we're using all that pertinent vocabulary, the literary terms, but I'm also trying to figure out what genres interest them. And then I can kind of like push them towards those genres in my free voluntary library. So, and then the same thing with, at the end of like choosing a book and reading the book, they all meet, and they, yes, book tasting. They all meet, and their final assessment is for them to actually talk about their book. And a lot of times it's the students, they're in groups with students who haven't read their books, and not only are they just talking about the characters, but this is where I'm like helping them level up, like structurally as well, and they talk about what they would have done in the situation that their character was in. And they love it, because a lot of times the kids are like, how do I say I would have done this, and it's like, okay, so you have the opportunity to like teach that, and have them actually use that, when they're talking about books. So yes, I love both. I use them sort of in tandem for different purposes. And the last thing I'll say about this, because I know teachers would be very, I think this kind of sealed the deal for me. So I did one year, I was like super just FVR all the time. We did it like the most that year. Okay. I had a kid. I remember his name. Well, I won't say his name, but he was on a baseball team, and like super laid back. He took the class because he was like, I want to be with my friends, and I heard this is the party class. Well, his mom came to me. This was Spanish 4. His mom came to me during report card pickup, and she says, "Hey, my son wants to take the AP language test, and my class wasn't AP; it was level 4." And I talked to the AP teacher who had him the year prior. Okay, and she said, "Oh, you know what? I don't think it's a good idea. He really didn't do well in Spanish 3. I think if he takes the test, he may actually tank all our scores. Our average." And I was just like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Well, he's doing really well in my class," but so I didn't. I was just like, "Whatever." The mom came back to me and she says, "My kid never has asked me in all these years to take a test. Can you make this happen?" And I said, "Okay." So I went over the teacher's head and talked to the AP coordinator. Long story short, he took this test and he scored a 4. Okay? He scored a 4. So 5 is the highest. And 4 is where, like, if you're going to like an Ivy League college, some colleges they take that as credit. And I was so proud because, number one, this was a testament to the reading. This was a testament to the reading. And the fact that this kid, the teacher was like, he didn't do well in level 3. That's why I didn't recommend him for AP. So he didn't take AP. He just took 4. We didn't do any prep for AP. All we did was read, we watched series, and we talked about the books and we talked about the series. That's what we did all year, and he scored a 4. So I'm like,
That's
that
awesome.
was do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. That deserves applause. Absolutely.
Love
Um,
the sound effects.
yeah. Well, we add the I'll tell you my little thing. I have two that I like. I do FVR and I do class stories, but I do class stories a little bit different. So for FVR, I call it silent reading. I'm really against jargon that I have to explain what it means. And
Hmm.
kids would go, "It's not free voluntary reading because we're not free not to do it." So
That's true.
so I'm like, it was always called silent reading when I was a kid, but I don't like all the jargon that we because you have like
Yeah.
circling. It's a great term, but I have to explain what it is first before you can understand to do it. When I can just say scaffolded differentiated questioning, which
Oh,
everybody
right.
knows what that
Yes.
is. You
Yes.
know, it's just much
Agree.
more. I try to get the jargon out.
Acceptable.
So I call it silent reading, and I started silent reading right when I started teaching because it was something that we did in English too. In elementary school, we did it. It was something we already done, and I used children's books. And until someone said to me, children's books are really hard
Yeah.
because it's got language that is common to kids in that country, but not
Mhm.
necessarily vocab that they would be learning in a language class. And so they're picking books that they already know from English. They're translated and they're going from that. They're not actually acquiring any language in that way. And then they said Dr. Seuss is even more impossible because he makes up words. And what I love about the Dr. Seuss books is they keep the rhymes in all the languages they translated. They keep all the rhymes in there, but they do make up words in both English and in the target language as well. And the kids don't have enough language to know that that's a made up word.
Hmm.
So Dr. Seuss is really hard, but they're loved books. The kids always gravitate towards a Dr. Seuss or towards a Clifford, and a Clifford's a third or fourth grade book, and our kids just aren't there. So I have a whole heck of a lot of children's books that are stored in the cabinet. I don't use them anymore. I use them for kindergarten day when I can read to them because then I can explain it and read what I want. So that's why I use those, or for my native speakers. And I switched to novels, and I really like using those novels now. And it is free choice; they can choose whichever novel they want. And I had a kid choose Harry Potter in level 1. Now, I never taught AP, but our AP teacher tried teaching Harry Potter to AP kids and gave up on it. She goes, "It's too hard. It was too hard." But he loved Harry Potter. So who was I to say, "No, you can't read it"? So I let him. He read it for 4 years, the same book. He was trying to get through it. He read it every day. And I could tell he was acquiring stuff because I'm like, I don't know this word. I look up a dictionary. Oh, it's a Harry Potter word. Another word, Harry Potter word. Because I'm not into that sorcery, magic, all those words. I didn't know what those words were, so, but they're creeping into his text. When he's writing and stuff, it's creeping in. So he's acquiring something. It took him 4 years to get through that book, but he did. So I don't care what they read as long as they're reading and using that to their knowledge. Now, with class stories, the way that I handle them is my kids always were frustrated to read the story that we did in class yesterday. They would like, we just did this story. They didn't understand that because it's now reading, it's using a whole different part of the brain and a whole different, different skill set. They just didn't get that. They're just like, we read this yesterday. I mean, we did this story yesterday orally. Now we're reading it. We already know what's going to happen. What's the point? So I took that to heart, and I know the reason why a lot of teachers do that because it breeds familiarity and they can feel successful. But what I would do is I would take the same vocabulary that we were targeting in that, and I'd write a news story. But I'm listening to what kids say or do in my classes, and I'll incorporate that into a story. Last year it was I had a kid. I asked if he wanted to be a chef. And I asked if he wanted to own his own restaurant. And he said, "Yes, I want to own my own restaurant." I said, "What kind of restaurant do you want to do?" He goes, "I want an elegant restaurant." "Okay, what do you want to serve?" and he didn't know the word for steak. So instead of saying the word for steak, he said the word for cow, which I understood what he's doing, and he was using circumlocution. That was perfect. A plus, right? But then I got a thing in my head. I'm going to write a story about him being a chef of his own restaurant, but he's not serving steak. He's serving cow food to cows. So his customers were cows. So we had cows, and we had grass pizza and all this different kind of different cow foods, but we made a story that way. Same vocabulary that we were working on, but I took something from the kids and made it into a story. And I listened every single time for those things. We had a kid also last semester. He had a ring on, and he had it on his wedding ring finger. He's a freshman. I'm like, class, look, Junior is married. And we started this little thing about Junior being married. I said, Junior, are you married? He goes, yep, I'm married. He played along. And so then the class story, I wrote a story about Junior being married, and then he had a wedding between 8th grade and 9th grade. We kept it appropriate, I mean, obviously. But it was just a fun little story. But all the kids were interested in that because it was about them, and it wasn't another story that we did in class. They were still getting the repetition of the vocabulary that they were familiar with, but in a different context. And for me, proficiency is not knowing I know that story orally and I know that story written and I know that vocabulary only in those two contexts. I want them to be able to apply that vocabulary in multiple contexts. So it doesn't have to be just in that story or just in that written story. It can be anywhere you know the vocabulary out of those contexts. That's what true proficiency is for me. And so that's kind of my goal with that. And I love that. And with my class novels, one of the activities I really like to do with them is what I call a 3-2-1 reading, where we'll read 2 chapters together as a class so I can get them into the book. Then the next chapter they read in pairs, back and forth. And then the next chapter of that they read individually, because I want to get them to be individual readers. And if we only read them as a class novel, they never really learn or build that confidence to be able to read it on their own. Then I'll go back and then I'll read a chapter as the whole group, and then the next chapter will be pairs, and then the next chapter will be one. So they're not reading the whole book by themselves, but it's being scaffolded. We have the group, then we have pairs, and then we have singles. And after each chapter, then we come together as a class and discuss it. And I find that works really, really well to help build some independent readers and to make them more confident in their reading abilities, because it's been scaffolded before they get to the individual reading. We've already read at least 3 chapters, 2 as a class, 1 with a partner, and now you've got 3 chapters behind you, and you can go ahead and read 1 by yourself, and then you can see if you got it right when we discuss it afterwards. I really like that particular activity.
I was going to say that's my strategy for reluctant readers. I have
Which
them
brings us
read,
to
but
our
I
next
do it.
topic.
Oh, I do it, but I do it opposite. I have them read. I'll read a chapter first, and then I'll have them read together, and they can continue to read in pairs. I normally choose short books in the beginning. They
Yeah,
can continue to read in pairs, and it has really helped because a lot of students, number one, they are not used to having choice. They're not used to reading, and they just feel really intimidated. So that was a kind of really good buffer for them.
absolutely. And that's our next topic we're going to finish up with today is, what is your trick to get kids who just hate reading to engage with stories? And my thing is, if you don't like to read, it's just because you haven't found a book you like yet. That's kind of
Mm,
my thing. And
mm,
I'm a slow reader, but I like to read. But I'm a slow reader. So my little strategies were, when someone told me I had to read something, I never read it. So in school, I think I only read 1 book that they told me I had to
mm.
read up until college, but all through school, and it was The Day No Pigs Would Die. That was the only one that I remember reading all the way through. I'm like, dang, the quiz is really easy now that I read the book, because I wouldn't have read it before because you told me to read it. I'm like, you can't tell me to read it. I'm not reading that book. That's not my book. I mean, I would read Stephen King books and I would finish a whole novel in a week. I read 100 pages
Ooh.
a day. And I could do that. But when it comes to being told to read a book, I was always hesitant to do that until college. And even in college, I'm a slow reader. I'd only pick one reading class per semester. So if it was a history, there was no English in that semester because I couldn't do, when they say read 80
Mm.
pages for tomorrow, there was no way I was going to read 80 pages in history and 80 pages in English and be able to be ready for tomorrow. There was just, I'm too slow of a
Well,
reader
now
for
they
that.
have ChatGPT. That's what they use now.
Oh, yeah. We didn't have that in my day. We had
Unfortunately, I've seen kids use that for English.
Yeah, we have Cliff Notes. That's what we used to use. Cliff Notes.
Yeah,
Remember
right,
that?
right.
Cliff Notes.
Yeah, you have to pay for them though, right? You have to
Yeah,
do
you
a
had to go
subscription.
buy them at the bookstore. But hey,
Oh, right.
that's how I got through A Tale of Two Cities.
You know what? But Cliff Notes are very helpful. I like the Cliff Notes as I mean, I've always been a reader, but one of the things that I think people need to stop looking down on Cliff Notes is it organized the reading so you can actually visibly see the themes and the
Mhm.
concepts. And that's something as I'm reading, I'm not thinking like what you referred to earlier, taking a book apart and analyzing. I'm just reading to kind of like figure out what's going on in the book. So I did like the Cliff Notes where I'm like, oh, okay, this is a theme, and I kind of connected. So it's a good study
Yeah,
companion, I guess.
that's what it was designed to do. But a lot of us would just read the book summary at the end and then
Yeah.
said, "Ooh, we accomplished the book. We read the book." I did that with Tale of Two Cities. I remember that I did not read that book. That short story or whatever it was. It was a short story because it was an anthology. But I didn't read that book. I did the Cliff Notes. I'll be honest. That's what I did. I got my A's and B's, so I had almost straight A's in high school. Only freshman year did I not have straight A's. So I did what I was supposed to do. But yeah,
Well,
I
it
I
sounds like
cheated.
it was the best of times and the worst of times.
Absolutely. What about you, Pat? What do you do for reluctant readers?
Well, when I had them, I just would be like, "Have you ever tried reading in Spanish? How do you know you don't like it?" You know, they were reluctant in English, but maybe that was because they, whatever. But my go-to sentence was always, "Have you tried reading in Spanish? How do you know you don't like it? You haven't tried it yet." It's kind of like the kid who looks at the casserole on the supper plate going, "I'm not eating that." And it's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, yes, you are, or you're not going to have supper tonight." So, the I would start with the classroom stories that we came up with and say, "Well, you just read it. Why didn't you? You liked it. You thought it was funny. You answered questions. You raised your hand. So why can't you try this?" Well, it's different. It has a cover. Well, okay, then I'll put a cover on your classroom reading the next time and see what you think.
Yeah.
And I could play with them just as well, and they eventually would give it a try, and they're like, "Oh, it wasn't so bad." "Oh, okay, that's good." And let's try another one. Pick the kind that you like. If you don't like this, then try something else. That's why it's called choice.
Yeah. And for me,
Something
I
I
would
forgot
go.
to mention. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, AC.
Oh, I was gonna say some I forgot to mention because I actually have a little outline. I was like, let me make sure. And this is very important: is to unpack the reluctancy because I think sometimes we don't like when you know why students are being reluctant, then you can kind of help them and guide them. And I had a student who was very reluctant, and I found out later that talking to the assistant principal that he had a very very low reading score, and was kind of like a few grades below. And so his reluctancy was like, well, I see all these other kids just grabbing books and reading, and like I can't do that. And so talking to him a little bit and then sort of guiding him to books that were very simple. So I'll give you one of the books that really was good. That's a good book, and it's by Camilla Bates. It's like I forgot Carlos Le. Well, she's like a series. It's like Carlos Celebra, oh Carlos Camina or something. It's like a kind of like a graphic novel, like stick figures, and like every page is like so. But the cover of the book looks just like every other kid, and so kind of talking to him, showing him how to use the glossary. And then I gave him a short story one time that I had written, and it was I forgot what it was, but it's not published or anything. And it had a lot of cognates. And I remember telling him, I was like, I want you to read this. And I gave him a little sheet, and he had to do it in the hallway. I said, write down all the cognates. And he didn't get all of them because, again, he didn't have a really rich kind of background in with print in English. But doing that really helped him to see, like, okay, I think I can do this. Like, maybe I can do this 50%. Can't do 100, but I'll give it a try. So I think figuring out why they're reluctant. And then after that, like I mentioned, pairing them up with other students, helps. And also guiding them in the library. So that's another thing, because a lot of times reluctant readers, they don't read. So they go to that classroom library, they're overwhelmed. And then you kind of go with them and you talk to them, and then you kind of give them ideas of what to read. I think that's helpful.
Absolutely. And we have some things. Angelica says some teachers call it FCR, free choice reading. Everybody reads, but you choose what you read in Spanish. Absolutely. Vicky says we love the Carlos series. In English, his name is Jake. We read about Jake. Angelica says she has 2 new books about Carlos. Yay! Absolutely. And what I do with the reluctant readers is 2 things. I find what they like, not reading
Mhm.
wise, what they actually like. Like I had a kid, he goes, I really like sports. My favorite sport is baseball. Well, we have some books about that, about baseball. So let's go find that particular book. Or I like mysteries. And that's what's great with all these authors. Blaine Ray started it, which I love. I mean, it's absolutely, we needed at the time because all the
Yeah,
graded readers we had at the time were way too hard. The ones that came out from the textbooks were way too hard for the kids at the level they said they were supposed to be. And
yeah,
so having these books really helped in causing all these authors to come out of the woodwork and create this wide variety, multiple genres. We've got all different types of books. Whatever kind of genre you like, there is a book that is written for learners of that language in there that all these authors have written. So I find what they like, and then I know my books in my library, so then I can find that right book. The kids who like gossip, the Confessions of a Classroom is a really good one for that particular thing. The kids who like the absurd and way off thing, that's the Hamburguesas book. What's that one called? I can't remember. It was written by
oh, super,
kids.
super
Yeah, Super
burguesas.
Vegasas. Yeah, that one is awful. It goes from a kid eating in a restaurant, I mean, making hamburgers in a restaurant, to the mob at the end. I mean, where did they get those 2 things together in the same story? Nobody knows. But the kids like that kind of book. I've got sports books in there. I've got mystery books. So I do that with them. I find out what they like, and then we find a book that goes that way. I'm with you too. Why are they a reluctant reader? Are they dyslexic? Do they have a
Yeah,
learning
right.
disability? Are they embarrassed because they read slow? Like I read slow. I say
Yeah.
I'm a slow reader. It's
Me
okay to
too.
be a
I am
slow
too.
reader. I'm a slow reader. And as I'm getting older, because especially after COVID, I have problems remembering what just happened because I have that
Yeah.
brain fog left over. I had COVID really bad in 2020. I almost died.
Mm.
Actually, I technically did die and went to the hospital. But
Oh,
I I have this brain fog and it's still there, and it makes so I like Ray go, what? Who's that character again? I have to go back. I said it's okay to go back, even in movies. If you want to rewind, what did he say again? You want to hear that again? It's perfectly okay. So I humanize those things with them to let them know that it's okay to have these issues. It's okay to struggle with words you don't know what they mean. It's okay that you read slow. It's okay that you have dyslexia. It is okay. We can surmount that. So finding out the why, finding out what they like, and then the third technique is to go, okay, I found you the book. I think this is good for you. Let's sit down and we'll read together while everybody's silently reading. And so I'll sit down with them and we'll go through it back and forth. And then it'll be won't be silent for us, it'll be really quiet in the corner, but we'll read it and I'll get him started in the book so he can feel some confidence in there. And then the next day I'll let him go on his own. And we have those really simple books. Myra Canyon is awesome at making really simple books that any kid can understand. The
Mhm.
Capybara books, the Perezosa books, those are really easy for the kids, and who are really struggling. They're really great. And I love what her Escape from Cuba book. I love that book. I told her you need
Mhm.
to make a second version of that one and flesh it out. So that's a good one for basic readers, but there's so
Mhm.
much there you're leaving out. It's such a good story. Make an expanded version for something in like a level 2, because I love that book. I love the story. I love talking about the culture of Cuba and the wet foot, dry foot, and the way that we have this relationship with Cuba. I like talking about that. And there's just not a lot to grasp on in that book. It's a really good one for beginning readers. It's really easy to read. It's exciting. There's something that happens in there. There's life and death. There's sharks. There's all kinds of things that are going on there. But I want an in-depth version. I want a bigger version for upper levels to be able to grasp onto as well.
Have
But
you
those are
have
my
you heard
things.
of Una Casa Dividida? Because that's a good. That's I know my kids like. It's same theme, but it goes a little deeper.
I have
It's
that
called
book. I have not had a chance to read that one, so I'll have to
Okay.
read that one.
For several years in a row, kids were like, it gave them a very in depth understanding of like. I mean, I'm saying if you want, if you have like an Escape Cubano for level 1 and you want something level
Yeah,
2 and hasn't it she hasn't updated or the second edition, that may be a good option.
great. Thank you for suggesting. I will look at that. Look at that. Okay, we are over our time. Does
Ooh.
anybody have any last? I know it's already. We are 10 minutes past. Anybody when you're talking and having fun, it's, it goes quickly. Anybody have any last words that they would like to say?
Well, I want to thank you for having me on here. I really appreciate the conversation. And you mentioned something about students loving gossipy books. So I wanted to actually put a shameless plug for my new book, La Vecina Chismosa, una comedia.
Awesome.
So it hasn't made the rounds yet because I've been busy. I haven't done a lot of like promotion yet because school is starting back, and I'm super like I can't do too many things at once, but it's a delightful read. A lot of the beta readers and people who've read it already, they love it. And yeah, it's all about chisme and aventura.
Awesome. Where can they find that book?
You can find it right now at Command Performance Books, BryceHedstrom.com, and also on Amazon. I can send you links, and I can also send you a link for uh, to enter to win like 2 free copies as well. So I'll send
Oh,
that to
great.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add it too. Absolutely. Stream.com. Put those up there.
Well, thank you very much for having me a part of the group here today. And I guess the one thing that I would say, in addition to what we've already talked about, is to not let them be afraid.
Mm.
Not let the kids be afraid of reading, even if it is just the type up of your classroom story, from the day before or whatever. Hold their hand if they need to have a hand holder. Walk them through nice and slow, and they'll eventually come around to wanting to read on their own. And it may not be the same as everybody else, but they'll find their niche.
Yeah,
You just gotta help find it for them sometimes.
Agreed.
absolutely. And Vicky Schrader says textbooks, in my experience, draw from way too broad of a vocabulary. Absolutely. Their stories don't get the repetition needed of controlled number of words to get acquisition. And I find that textbooks teach a lot of useless words. The kids do not need to know the word paperclip. It is not a required word. Once they leave
Yeah.
high school, they will not use that word ever again unless they become an office worker.
Mm.
It's just not a word that they need to know. And my kids are always like, why do I have to learn this word? I'm like, I totally agree. Let's cross that word out. It's not helpful for them, and they put in 100 words every chapter, and it's like, can we go have you heard of a high frequency dictionary? Can we kind of pick words that kids are going to actually use? They're not going to need to know every zoo animal, because when I go to whenever I go to a city, I like to go to the zoo. So I've been to Madrid Zoo, I've been to the Berlin Zoo. I go to the zoos, and I see, and they have, guess what, the animal names in all the languages. They don't just have it in the target language. It is in English, it's in German, it's in Spanish, you know. So you don't need to know those animals, and if you want to know, then great, but it's not high frequency. When are you going to be talking about a buffalo outside
Right.
of a zoo? You know, it's just not a high frequency. There's so many other words that we can focus on and teach than the words that they put in the book. So 100% agree with you, Vicky. Absolutely. And then
Agreed.
Vicky also says, congratulations on your new book. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I'm going to
Thank
go
you.
after this. I'm going to go buy a copy for my classroom library, a couple copies. I always buy 2 copies. I got that from Myra Canyon. Always buy 2 copies of every book,
Yes, I do
because
the
if you
same.
want to have a paired reading, they can both have a copy of
Yes.
the book.
Yeah.
So if you can't buy a
And
class set,
Let's fight. Let's less fights.
yeah. Because I know that the kids were always fighting over the capybara books and the Parithosa books. So I buy like
Hmm.
10 of those because they all want
Yeah.
those books because they're easier for them to read. And I don't care if they're in level 3 and they want to read that lower book, that
Yeah.
really easy book, because it builds confidence. And
Yes.
confidence is such an important part of language building. I don't think we talk about it enough, but we need to build that confidence, because if they can read that easy book, then they can go to the next book and they can go to the next book, but they've got to start somewhere. And if they're choosing an easy book, that's telling me as a teacher, they don't have the confidence in
Mm,
reading. And so then I will adapt my teaching to that group of kids who are always reaching for those lower kids. So if I'm teaching a level 3 and they're always reaching for the easy books, then I know that I need to scaffold reading a little bit more to build that confidence up to get them to want to read some more books. And we do those little commercials lots of times. I'll start them off in the beginning and I'll go, you know, this book is like, I love the Los Bakers Bob Peru. I love that book. And so we talk about it. And when we finish reading it, I go, where was where was the shrunken head at the end of that book? Oh, they put it back in that altar. They didn't bring it back to the museum. I go, well, in the sequel, they get home. They open up their suitcase, and what is inside? And I
mm,
stop. And they all want to scramble for the sequel to that book, because we read the Los
mm.
Bakers first as a class, and then bingo, they all want to go race that out for a free voluntary reading. So that's kind of, I like to do those kinds of things, little commercials. And that's one of the assignments I have kids do after you read a book, to make a 30-second TikTok about your book.
Mm. Oh,
So then they do
nice.
that. And so I'll put them on a little class page of videos that they can go ahead and watch and see which kind of books they want. It helps with it. And I don't even have them have to do it in the target language, because a lot of them are level 1, and so they can't do it
Mm.
in the target language well. So I don't care. I just want them to do it so it proves to me that they're actually read the book. So I like that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and end up. If anybody has any questions for either AC or Pat, go ahead and please put them in the chat, or if you're watching this on the replay, in the comments, and I'll make sure that they get to them. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. A huge thanks to hanging out with us today, and even bigger thanks to guests AC and Pat for dropping the kind of reading wisdom that might actually clear space on your FVR shelf. So today we learned that reading isn't just filler time. Absolutely not. It is a secret weapon for language acquisition, reluctant readers, and even impressing your admin. And I will tell you what I always tell my kids: reading is grammar in action. So you learn vocabulary and you learn grammar just by
Mhm.
reading it in context. I can't teach you those things. You've got to be able to experience them, and that's where novels come in. And if you had fun, learn something new, or just need an excuse to procrastinate grading, hit subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with another teacher who could use a little reading magic. Remember, you can watch us live on YouTube or catch the replay on your favorite podcast app anytime. So ditch the drills, trust the process, and I'll see you next time on Comprehend This.